Hello my friends, welcome to this little video I'm going to do about the history of the sword. A lot of people are interested in this. I get a lot of emails and questions about this. Last night we were training with the kodachi in class. We have a weapons class every week here at the dojo on Tuesday nights, and this may be very boring to you. It may be very exciting. It's exciting to me. I like to study the sword, not just how to use it, but where did it come from, the history, how is it made, the metallurgy of it. All this stuff is very interesting to me, but you may find it very boring, but that's okay. But I want to go over just quickly a couple of the different sizes of sword. I've done videos like this before, but not in this particular order. And to know how to use the sword, you really should respect the weapon and understand its history. I favor the Japanese sword, but the Chinese sword cannot go without mention. It's far older culture. It's been around way longer than the katana, so you cannot even speak of the Japanese sword without going further back into China. So first let us discuss the jian. This is a Chinese sword, and excuse any pronunciation I may mispronounce. It's almost subjective. My ex-girlfriend was Chinese, and I couldn't even pronounce half of what I was talking with her about. It's an extremely difficult language. I find it very hard, and even the dialects in China are very different depending on where you grow up. And she would always correct me on my Chinese. So as far as I know, it's J-I-A-N. It's pronounced jian as far as I know. So this is a Chinese blade, and a beautiful blade, isn't it? This is a double-edged blade, a chokuto, which means a straight blade. And I don't know if the camera will do this justice. So this you've seen like in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. This is a double-edged blade, so you can't really put it back in its sheath the same way you can a Japanese sword. It's double-edged, it's a straight sword, and it was used during the last 2,500 years in China. Isn't that beautiful? From my understanding, some of these were used two-handed and some were used one-handed, depending on the style or the period of time. In Chinese folklore, this is known as the gentleman of weapons, the gentleman of weapons, and it's considered one of the four major weapons of Chinese martial arts, and along with the staff, the spear, the saber, the dao, this is the jian. Within any given period, the general purpose of the jian is a multi-purpose cut and thrust weapon. So it was capable, as you can see the tip here, of stabbing, very powerful at stabbing the opponent, extremely sharp, and you could also make precise cuts and slashes with it as well. I find a straight blade does not slash or cut as well as a curved blade, but for stabbing you can't match this. It's quick. In Japan, this is called a suguri or a ken, and again it's a chokuto blade. And this was produced prior to the 10th century. Very, very old. Now, although most historical swords found have a solid and firm base, this is a solid, hard steel here, it was not unknown to have flexible blades. In modern design, since the Qin dynasty, Chinese military forces have used flexible steel to extend the reach of their swords. So in movies a lot you'll see the spring steel where this stuff bends and moves in fight scenes. I think most of them were probably a hard steel, but it was not unknown in history to have a soft steel, especially since the Qin dynasty. But this is called a suguri or a ken in Japan. I just have one here. I don't teach this, although I could, because a sword, has a lot of similar features as the others. But just to see the beauty of this one is nice. You got the pommel here. Usually these are highly decorated. You have the handle here, what in Japan is the suka. You have the guard here, and you could catch the swords here. You could parry with these, thrust, deflect, all kinds of different things. Of course, putting it back in the scabbard here, you would not draw it across your hand as you would a normal katana. You'll cut your hand open. So this takes a lot more dexterity and skill to put back in the scabbard. But I just wanted to quickly show you this jian sword here. It's really cool and beautiful. This one was hand forged in China. I don't know what province, but beautiful, beautiful sword. Very heavy, very heavy. So that is the Chinese jian. Now, it was made famous in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and this leads us into the history of the tachi. So now let's discuss these great swords from old Japan, the odachi. If I write the kanji, I don't know if you can see this paper very well. This is the kanji for o, which means big or great. And then these two kanji here, these two together mean dachi or tachi, or sword, large or great sword. So the odachi's importance, this is a very old sword, big and great. It was not very wieldy, it was unwieldy, so they would use this in battle. Probably would take the scabbard off pre-battle, and a lot of field soldiers had these. The importance of the odachi declined after the siege of Osaka in 1615. There was a battle between Tokugawa Ieyasu and Toyotomi Hideyori, and since then this is used more of a ceremonial piece. It wasn't used in battle in the last several hundred years. It's just too big. This was carried a lot of the times on the samurai warriors with a chain or something to hold onto their obi belt, and it was just left on your left hip to swing. Again, very unwieldy. You obviously wouldn't have this indoors. You could wear these on a horse, and I've seen many pictures. Of course, studying history, you have to be skeptical because none of us were there, so anything that's written, make sure you double and triple check your sources, because obviously the winner of a battle writes the historical books. The losers do not get that opportunity, so be skeptical of what you read about. Most I find with any type of sword lore is complete myth, or I'm very skeptical in believing half the stories you hear. But if even half of them are true, it's a really cool culture. So this big odachi is more of a ceremonial object, but it was used as an infantry sword in a certain time. These were made later for Shinto shrines, and that became their main purpose after they were no longer used. But due to the amount of skill required to make one of these were considered exotic in appearance, and these were suitable for praying to the gods and stuff. But can you imagine wielding one of these? I'll unsheath it for you here. Look at the size of the suka here. It's got to be 2.5 feet long. And then removing the saya, you can just see the size of this thing. I don't know if the camera can pick up the length. Some of these blades are 2-3 feet long. Can you imagine trying to wield this on a battlefield? It'd be very unwieldy. So the odachi, this big, great sword, is really, really cool. Another name for this is called no odachi. So no odachi, again going back to our paper here. No, this is the kanji for no, and it basically, this means field. So a no dachi, no and dachi here, means field sword. So again, whether it was called odachi or no dachis, kind of semantical here, but you can see it just means big, great sword, or a field sword is another name for it. And again, these were used on the field. Imagine trying to ride with this on a horse. You had to draw it a certain way so you wouldn't cut the horse's neck or lose it in battle, or how could you draw it with your armor? Very difficult to do. But you would probably have a helper. If you were in battle, you would have a retainer that would unsheath this for you, and he would carry it away, and you would just go into battle with one of these and perhaps a kodachi on your belt, or a tanto, or something like that. Here's another version here. Another large sword. Look at the size of that handle there. Massive, big suba guard. If I unsheath this one, it's a beautiful, beautiful long sword. This is the longest sword that I own at almost 6 feet tall. And again, the camera cannot do it justice at the size. But just to show you the massive size of this as I slide this, look how long that continues to go, foot after foot after foot. It's just huge, and the kasaki is huge here as well. Again, when you swing this thing, unlike a movie, you have to dedicate your entire being to it, because once you swing it, you're going to have a heck of a time redirecting it for a second cut. But this was perfect for stabbing into armor and riding up into the butsumetsu, or under the jawline of the helmet, so that you could stab someone from far away. As a foot soldier, you might use this to hack the legs of a horse. I know that's gross, but this is warfare we're talking about. So you would, as the horse rode by, you would use this to cut the horse, hamstring it so that it would fall and perhaps break the neck of the opponent. Can you imagine being in heavy armor and falling 8-9 feet off a horse? You'd break your shoulder in a second, and then you would be dispatched with a spear, which was the most vicious of all battlefield weapons in Japan. So that's the big, great tachi here. Beautiful sword. I don't use it very often because it's just unwieldy, especially inside a dojo, but we have used it outdoors, and it's a really cool weapon to own. So you go from those longer, larger field swords to the long wrapping swords to the tachi, which is the battle sword. This is kind of a tachi here, although it looks kind of a katana. The tachi were worn on with the blade down, and they were usually much longer than the katana. It could be held on the side of your hip on a horse, and you'll see old style battles from Japan where they have a tachi, and again the blade is facing down and the curve of the blade is facing up. So this represents a tachi. It's not an actual one, but it's pretty close. It's a beautiful large sword from Japan. The tachi were used in battle quite a bit. And then going from there, later in period, you had what's the most famous of all, which is the katana. I'm not going to go over this too much because this is kind of overdone. This is a katana sword from Japan here. This one was handmade. But this is the one that they restricted the size on. This is the one you see in movies where the samurai is carrying the katana, the wakizashi, or the tanto, the daito. So this is the katana here. This was the one that's the most famous of all. Two-handed, or in some cases a one-handed sword in later periods of time. This is a live blade, which is called a shinken. Shinken, S-H-I-N-K-E-N, means live blade or living soul blade, which means it's sharp. So you want to be very careful wielding these. I would never use these around students. This is made for tameshigiri, or cutting, or of course self-defense or killing. So this is a shinken, unlike an iaito, which is a non-sharp sword, which we use in class. Here is an iaito, which is an unsharpened sword. But the shinken, you want to keep away from people if possible. This is very dangerous, but a beautiful sword nonetheless. Let me just show that to the people out there, the beauty of this. You can see the straight hamon. That's kind of unusual to have a straight hamon there. This part of the blade is harder. This is a softer steel, a harder steel to hold the edge, the ha. That's a beautiful sword there. So that's the katana. I'm not going to go over that too much. So last night in class we did what's called the kodachi. Kodachi, if I get my paper out here, I'll do the kanji for you. Ko here, doom. This means, ko means small or short. And again, we have the kanji here. Dachi or tachi, and then ko, small dachi. The D turns to a T, so it's the T of tachi turns to dachi. So it's kodachi. Kodachi, literally translating as small or short sword. This is one of the traditionally made Japanese swords, or nihonto, used by the samurai class of Japan. And this is a representation of, where did I put it? This is not technically a kodachi, it's more of a wakizashi, and there's a slight difference between the two, but you can see this is a short or small sword. Again, these are from I've seen them as far back as the Kamakura period, which again was 1185 to 1333. And these were in the shape of the long tachi sword. They were in the same shape. And a lot of the kodachi, what separates these from a wakizashi or a shoto, the kodachi are mounted in the tachi style, but they had a length of less than 60 centimeters. So this one is not exactly like this as far as the fittings and things, but they would have looked similar. Again, this is more of a wakizashi here. I'm moving my legs because I'm sitting in seiza, and you have to move once in a while or cut your circulation off. So these are often confused with the wakizashi due to their length and handling techniques. However, their construction is what sets the two apart. The kodachi had a set length, while the wakizashi are forged to complement the wielder's height or the length of their katanas. And you would see, again in movies we go back to, because that's our culture, the samurai would often have a long sword, his katana, and his wakizashi in his obi belt, and that they would carry the pair of these together. This is, again, more modern. Now, by modern, I mean the last 400 or 500 years is considered modern in Japan. The history is very far, very old, so much older than America or even the European. So these two swords were carried together in the belt. But this would have been tailored more to the particular needs of the samurai warrior. So the kodachi was too short to be called a sword properly, but then this was too long to be called a dagger, so it's considered the primary short sword. Now, the exact use of the kodachi is really unknown. Again, none of us were there in history, but it was probably a companion sword to the normal sized tachi, or it might have been a sword used by an adolescent, a young person who had to wield a smaller sword. Think of a hobbit, think of Frodo, getting sting versus a large glamdring or something that someone else would wield. A shorter sword for a shorter person, and these swords might have been tailored to the height of the wielder. No one really knows. But the kodachi appeared to have been produced only in a certain time period by specific schools and sword makers. Because the blade's length does not exceed the limits of the legal blade length, during the Edo period, the kodachi was commercial available to citizens. Now, the kodachi was also carried, believe it or not, by travelers. It was not restricted, so merchants and caravans, people could carry these. Foreigners sometimes could carry these for self-defense, because you would need a small, quick weapon to draw against bandits and brigands and highwaymen. So if someone tried to steal your stuff, they didn't have the gun, you would have this on your belt. And again, even some foreigners, as far as my research has shown, or citizens, could carry these kodachi legally, these small swords. And again, these can be drawn extremely fast, quick at removing small limbs. So that's the kodachi, or the short sword. And again, this is more of a wakizashi here, but I'm just going to go over these very hastily today. So now we get to the wakizashi. Waki means side. And I know I'm not doing these perfectly correctly, but you get the idea of these kanji here. And then doom, doom, doom. So together, these two mean side, inserted, side inserted sword. So again, here's a couple examples. This is a cheaply made iaito unsharpened practice wakizashi. Traditionally made Japanese nihonto worn by the samurai in feudal Japan. Here's one that we use in training quite a bit. This is the sharp one I just showed you. This one is a shinken blade, razor sharp. I had this handmade. I love the green sukaito. As you can see, that's quite beautiful. Very different, very natural green. And it has the sageo to match here. This would have been your companion sword. In my opinion, perhaps the most important of the entire collection, because this was the sword that was with you all the time. So it was not until the Edo period, which was around 1638, that the rulers of Japan tried to regulate the types of swords and the social groups that were allowed to wear them. And the lengths of the katana and the wakizashi were officially set by the government around 1638. They regulated everything. So can you imagine how we here in America, it's like with gun control and stuff, we don't like anyone to touch the Second Amendment, and it was the same back then, but the government was in charge, and they said, we're going to cut the handle length of the odachi and make it a katana. It's going to be harder for you to wield. It's going to be a shorter blade, so you have less reach in your self-defense skills. So the wakizashi had a blade length between 30 and 60 centimeters. For we dumber Americans, that's 12 to 24 inches. Contrary to our bubble, they still use centimeters in most of the world. We didn't switch to that system. So the wakizashi, there are ones called, again, this is an entire history of time, so there are many different lengths. You had some called an o wakizashi, which means big, which was almost the size of a katana. The ninja to, which is quite famous in movies, here's one here. This did not exist the way you see it in this movie form. This is a ninja to from the movies here. This is one that was wielded by Shokosugi in the 1980s. This is a chokuto straight blade, but there would have been straight blades in history, but again, the curve of the katana would have been preferred. And you would not walk around, quote unquote, with a ninja sword, because obviously you'd be discovered as a ninja and you'd be killed. So you would want to blend in. So a real ninja to would look more like a katana, but it would look, because you want to blend in, it would look like this, but it would have a much shorter blade and a longer saya, so that you could, in the end of the saya here, you could hide secret notes, you could put blinding powder in here, or shattered broken glass, to use as Mitsubishi here. You could also put poisons in here. I've heard of a story where they would urinate in the bottom and put urine in here, so that when you drew your sword, you could throw and spread the urine into the faces of the samurai. I mean, there's all kinds of strange stories. But the ninja to, so to speak, would have been a curved blade, but it would have been a shorter blade, perhaps with a bigger tsuba. But it would not have been one of these movie blades, perhaps made famous by the Kabuki theater, I don't know. But this is a cool looking sword. It's perhaps my best balanced sword in my collection. But this was made for the movies. The guard wouldn't have looked like that. You would have been arrested immediately, getting caught with one of those. However, I do think there were straight blades around, because from China there would have been chokuto straight blades for hundreds of years in Japan. And if I had the choice between no sword and a straight sword, I'm going to take one. But going back to the wakizashi here, so this would have been worn as a pair on the belt, called the daisho. Daisho literally means big little. So together, you have the katana Wakizashi, it's called a daisho, or big little, and these would have been held in your belt. Now, these carried together by the samurai warrior would have been an official sign that you were a samurai or a swordsman. So they would have known just by seeing you walk by, having two of these swords, that you were either, a military official, or you were perhaps a swordsman or a teacher of the sword. They would have known in culture. Just like you see a police officer carrying a sidearm, carrying his Glock or whatever they carry, you know that that's an official person. So you have the katana, the big sword. You have the wakizashi, which is called the little or the companion sword. And they could be forged differently. They could have a different cross-section, etc. Now, it was customary in old Japan to leave your long sword outdoors. When you entered someone's house or a castle, you couldn't carry these giant swords with you. You had to leave them outdoors. So they would say, onegai shimasu, leave your sword here, sumimasen, you put your sword down. But you would keep the wakizashi. You would keep this on you at all times. This was I said last night in class, I said, this is your wife. This was the husband. This was everything. This you kept on you the whole time in your belt, indoors, no matter who was around. This is the weapon that you would draw to save your life if you had to. So this was a very, very important weapon in the old days. So you left the katana outside the castle or the palace, but you would continue to wear this. And this has been in use as far back as the 15th or 16th century. This was a backup sword. This was your auxiliary sword. It was used in close quarters fighting, for stabbing, for slashing, anything you want. It was sometimes used to behead the opponent. You would kill the opponent, and back then, in order to show identity, you would take the actual head of the opponent, to your master to say, I have killed Senjiro so-and-so, and here is his head. Master would see the head. Probably wouldn't eat well that night, and then you would get your reward or whatever it was, or you would just retain your honor. It was a kind of barbaric. So this could be used to take the top knot of an opponent, which was an insult. If you had a beautiful top knot, your hair was very important to you as the samurai, and perhaps they would defeat you and you'd be on the ground, and instead of killing you, they would cut off your top knot, take your hair to insult you, and then you couldn't leave your house out of shame. These were also used to commit seppuku. So if you were dishonorable to your lord back then, it was considered, believe it or not, honorable to take this and cut your belly open. Hara, the belly, harakiri literally means belly cutting, and you would disembowel yourself and commit murder on yourself to show honor, to save your name. Don't forget the religions back then. Every society has a different religion. So Buddhism, Taoism, Shinto, a little bit newer, but they would have believed in reincarnation. So to them, this life was but another. To take this life into the next would have been considered not shameful and no fear. You would bounce right into another karmic realm. Your soul would continue. So unlike the Western religions, where they have a heaven and hell concept, a God concept, the atheistic religions back then of those cultures did not believe in a higher power, but they believed in reincarnation. And your life was but another cycle on the tree of life. The leaves come in the spring, they die in the fall and in the winter, and they're reborn again. So to commit harakiri, it's not harikiri, it's harakiri, or what they would have called seppuku, this ritual suicide. Again, barbaric, but that's what they did back then. This might have been the sword that did it. So it was a very important tool in the life of the warrior. Obviously, don't commit suicide, it's cowardly. And again, this could be carried by merchants, because you might encounter bandits on the road, so you would carry one of those yourself. So it's a really cool weapon. And the last type of sword I'm going to go over today, you're probably bored out of your skull or sleeping by now. I love this stuff. It's called a tanto. Tanto is quite famous. Not tanto, as in Lone Ranger, but tanto. This, let's get out our paper here. So you have to, which means blade or sword, and you have this kanji here. This means short, so short sword, short blade, tanto. Tanto, I think, came later. It's one of the traditionally made Japanese swords. Again, we call those Nihon to, that were worn by the samurai class of feudal Japan. So you had the katana, wakizashi, also called shoto, and then you had the tanto. And this dates back to the Heian period, when it was used as a weapon. But it evolved in design to become more ornate. So again, if you look at old films of samurai warriors or movies like Ran or in some cases Seven Samurai, Kagemusha, any of these movies, you'll see the big armored samurai complete in their yoroi, and they would have an odachi or katana on their belt, and then they would have a small tanto tucked in their belt. So some cases as many as 3 swords, even maybe even odachi on their back, a 4th sword, maybe even bow and arrow. Totally blinged out, totally geared out. But the tanto dates back quite far. Now these are used today in what we call tanto jitsu, which is the art of using the knife. So we call this a knife. So when I say get me a tanto, I mean go get me that short knife over there. So there is a difference between the tanto and the wakizashi as far as size. As you can see comparatively here, this red one and this green one, quite a difference in length of blade and stuff. Now this term tanto has seen a resurgence in the West since the 1980s, because you can get these on knife sites now. You have tactical tanto. So you can find these all over the internet in many, many different forms. There are modern forms of these. I have a couple of these. I didn't bring them in. I have them at home or in my car. And these are, again, perfect for piercing and stabbing. The tanto would have been used to perhaps behead an opponent, but it would also be used to find the chink in the armor. If your sword was broken in battle, you could take out your tanto knife from your belt. It was your last resort, and hopefully hit the armor and stab up into some soft area of the neck or something and find a vein, perhaps to live. And again, this could have been used to commit seppuku as well. Designed for piercing and stabbing. Not a lot of leverage to hack, although it was very sharp, one-sided blade here. Could seriously do some damage. But against armor, which is basically a person in a tank, this isn't going to do you too much good unless you're good enough at Budo and martial arts and taijutsu to maneuver around the tank to stab it in the soft parts. Women sometimes carried a tanto called a kaiken. I don't have a kaiken here, but it would have been a tanto without a tsuba guard. It would have just been a large a piece of wood with a hidden dagger inside called a kaiken. And they would have carried these on their obi, primarily for self-defense. So even women carried short knives. You've heard in history about sharp hairpins or keeping little knives, the kozuka knives in their hair and stuff. But the tanto could have been worn by a woman as well for self-defense. Now there are tons of types of tanto. There's too many to even label here. You can go on the internet and find literally dozens and hundreds of designs, different colors. This is an aikuchi tanto. Aikuchi, where the fuchi is flush with the mouth of the sheath. There's no tsuba guard to speak of. This one has a very small tsuba guard, but sometimes they wouldn't have any, and sometimes they would have large ones, like a guard like this. I would think the battlefield days, they would probably have a large tsuba guard because that would protect your hands from sliding on the blade and perhaps to parry someone's sword. But this is an aikuchi tanto, which means basically without a guard. So this is kind of a nasty little knife, isn't it? And I guess they could use this even to cut food and things like that. All these in common, as you can see. Oh, here's a ninja tanto. Again, not a real thing. This is from China, and this is from a movie. So again, if you've seen the 1980 Sho Kosugi movies, you have seen this tanto. Again, a square guard, chokuto straight blade. This is a handmade, very sharp blade. As you can see the hamon here, it's beautiful. This is a very, very nice tanto. This would easily go through a car door, because this is a handmade blade. This is about a $450 tanto sitting in my hand right here. So I only show you this out of respect. I don't use this in class with students or anything. Even look at the way the saya has this. Can you see the ribbing on here? Isn't that beautiful, the way it's designed? And it has this teardrop painting on here. So all these different sizes of swords depended on the history of time. We use most of these in our classes, believe it or not. Well, people say, why the hell would you want to study a weapon like a sword? No one carries a sword. To me, I say you're ignorant if you don't understand why we practice weapons. I would not practice weapons if it wasn't helping my unarmed training. Practicing weapons, whichever style you do, the Chinese sword, the Japanese sword, bow staff, anything you want. When you practice weapons, you're learning timing and distancing that you will not get anywhere else. You learn precision, you learn the timing and distancing, you learn the footwork, you learn how to control the weapon, you learn about safety. It's just unbelievably fun, but people who train with weapons are much better martial artists than ones who do not. And I don't care how good you are, ground fighting or wrestling or anything else. You can be the best taekwondo kicker out there, but if someone picks up a knife and comes at you, and you only have a knife, you better darn well know how to use it. That's why I recommend learning knife defenses. I recommend learning firearms defenses if you are a martial artist. It is a modern weapon. It is a tool that you need to know. And kill the stigma of gun versus knife guys. I have many friends in the gun industry. I train myself. You should not treat them as enemies. Don't be that arrogant, ignorant person on the internet that says, well, I don't care about martial arts, I'll just pull up my Glock. No. You've heard of the 21-foot rule. A trained martial artist will kill you in a second before you draw that out if he has a knife. Don't be ignorant. We should be brotherly. We should appreciate each other. The best fighters I know martial arts and know tactical firearm defenses. They know everything. Those are the guys that are the most humble, the most quiet, and don't fight with others. If you are a gun person, learn Budo. If you are a Budo person, learn guns. Respect them both. Yes, at a distance, a gun is best. Of course it is. Use common sense. But if you don't have a firearm and you only have a little kitchen knife, watching a video and reading a book or watching something on YouTube will not help you. If you're not trained on the mat with muscle memory, you are going to die. So learn how to use weapons of all kinds. And I'm talking how to use a Sharpie marker to defend yourself. How to use anything in sight. That is the art of the ninja and the samurai. The samurai would have embraced guns as they did. The Tanegashima rifles, they embraced the guns at a certain time, and then they rebelled against them because they believed them to be dishonorable. Man-to-man fighting, they believed, was a sword on sword. Use your skill. Any moron can pull a trigger, they thought. I want to fight him with a sword for honor. So you can see how I bounce back and forth. I think that's important and healthy to do. What's better than the other? This is what life is about. Discover the different weapons. Train them into your martial arts. Solo train if you don't have a dojo or a training partner. Just go out and let the woods be your training partner, as I did when I was 8 years old. I had my first sword. And decades later, I'm still just as passionate and as wonderfully excited about these weapons that are in front of me. But none of these do any good if you don't know how to use them. And on that note, my friends, I'll let you go with this perhaps boring historical lesson. Nothing can replace training, okay? We'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.